You are really against some big monsters.
When we actually had the event, the whole event was actually designed by communities. They had their own network of different stakeholders who non-journalistic actors who came across and designed it. So it was a very much a collaborative approach.
Just you said of climate justice being a Western concept, I do have certain objection towards it. Even though it may have originated from the Europe, the United States, from the environmental law justice, the Indian environmental governance, if you look at the movement, it is always the mass-based.
Are the workers really able to speak their mind? The journalists are driven by external groups. They don't even identify themselves as journalists. The socio-political conditions, they sort of are at the forefront of everything.
How do you define climate? Do you refer to climate change here as a result of human activities, as a result of industrial pollution and other man activities? Or do you see climate change here as climate change adaptation activities, climate action? So what is climate for you?
The Global South Network provides an important space to share experiences and learn good practices from one another.
Dialogue takes on a particular importance thanks to Global South Network, which allow us to believe in a better world of the rule of law.
This is a great initiative.
It's a wonderful initiative.
The Global South Network opened new horizons for judicial cooperations.
Global South Network provide a platform for meaningful dialogue and cooperation, fostering efforts to build a more equitable and resilient legal landscape.
GSN network continues to expand areas of activity, further strengthening its impact and reach.
The universal concept of justice compels us to join our efforts, and this is the forum for promoting the same goal.
Well deserved for the hectic activity you have made. I am astonished, I am amazed, I was impressed.
May I at the outset commend you, Dr. Ayad, for the immense work that you're doing in the GSN, and the Global South Network is a much admired initiative.
It's commendable. South Network focuses on all disciplines and regions, creating a bridge between academia, civil society, legal community, etc.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the fifth seminar in the phase 5 of the International Interdisciplinary PhD in Progress weekly seminar series, organized by the Global South Network, of which I am the founder and the chief convener, and I've been running these sessions since May 2023. I'm Dr. Namrata Acharya, lecturer in law at the Leicester Law School. My research interests lie within the areas of constitutionalism, rule of law, judicial independence, protection of human rights. On the teaching side, I've been teaching European Union law, constitutional law, human rights, political ideologies, jurisprudence, etc., for the last 5 years in different universities of the UK and beyond. It's a pleasure to chair today's Global South Network PhD in Progress session. I very much look forward to learning about the presenters research and engaging in the discussion that follows. I'm joined by 4 distinguished discussants, and I will briefly introduce them one by one. Our first discussant is Dr. Karina Shyrokykh, Associate Professor in International Relations at the Department of Economic History and International Relations, Stockholm University. Her research focuses on climate governance, human rights, European Union public administration networks, and external democracy promotion with a particular emphasis on quantitative methods. More recently, her scholarly work has examined disinformation studies as well as preparedness and crisis response in relation to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Our second discussant is Dr. Stellina, a legal academic with over 20 years of teaching and research experience in international environmental law and private international law. She currently serves as Senior Associate Professor at the Faculty of Legal Studies, SouthAsia University in New Delhi, and as Visiting Senior Research Associate at the University of Johannesburg. She is also an affiliate scholar at the Royal Wellenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. Our third discussant is Dr. Shivani Singhal, Research Fellow at the School of Earth, Environment and Sustainability at the University of Leeds. Her research interests include political ecology, water governance, environmental justice, intersectionality, and the politics of knowledge and power with a focus on India and the UK. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher on a UKRI funded project titled Just in Transformation of Food Farming Systems, Reconciling Net Zero and Other Land Use Ambitions. Our fourth discussant is Dr. Lasha Kavtaraze. He holds a PhD in Media Studies from the University of Bergen. Their research examines emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence and information verification in media. They have recently been involved in the Al Gore project at Christiania University of Applied Sciences, researching the impact of algorithmic moderation of news content on social media. Finally, it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Namrata Acharya, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Journalism at City St. George's University of London. Previously, for nearly 12 years, she worked as an assistant editor with Business Standard newspaper. In 2018 and 2020, Namrata won grants from the Earth Journalism Network to pen a series of stories from the Deltaic Sundarbans region of India. Her reporting on the Sundarbans won the C.R. Irani Award for the environment reporting, one of the prominent awards for environmental reporting in India. It was also shortlisted for the Kurt Schorch Memorial Fund Award by the Thomas Reuters Foundation. Today, Namrata will present part of her doctoral research titled Communitymedia for a Rights-Based Approach to Climate Reporting. She will speak for approximately 30 to 35 minutes, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of comments from our discussant. If time permits, we will then open the floor for a 15-minute Q&A session with the audience. Namrata, we are delighted to have you with us today. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Norman, and all the guests who have joined me today. And I'm really thankful for your time. So, without further ado, I would just start my presentation. So, the topic is community media for right-based approach to climate reporting and ethnography and power study in India. My supervisors are Dr. Leah Hellmuller and Dr. Rana Arafat from City St. George's University. A bit of introduction, which of course we know that climate change is affecting millions of people in India, but what we see is that in the mainstream media, the approach of climate reporting is very top down, which is that climate reporting is triggered mostly by major climatic events or some COP summits, etc. Whereas if we look into community media is more about documenting the everyday lived experiences of people from a very bottom up approach. What my thesis primarily aims is to first understand the power dynamics in community media. It is important to know when we talk about community media, we think of it as a very horizontal structure led by communities. However, if in India, what we see that community media is often facilitated by an external NGO or organization. It all it apart from that, community media also negotiates, in the environment in which it thrives, like all the societal, the economic, the social, the caste based discriminatory structures. So it thrives in an environment with multiple layers of power. The basis of this thesis, the center of this inquiry, are the community reporters, who is the locals, of course, the locus of this inquiry. And my idea is to connect their idealized vision of right-based climate reporting, or what we may call role conception, to role enactment, or what they are actually doing. And of course, one of the aims is to have some of the outcomes of my research, which could be implemented to have actionable outcomes through a PAR approach. The conceptual framework, as I already pointed out about journalistic roles, I won't elaborate more on it. But of course, one important thing to note here is that in mainstream media, it is somewhat a redundant exercise to connect role conception with role enactment, because it is mediated by the corporate agency running the organizational values. So reporters, they themselves have little agency. However, in community media, theoretically, or if we look at its end purpose, it is the voice of the communities. It represents community values. So connecting role conception to role enactment is a very meaningful exercise. Briefly on my literature review, it is simple, divided in three parts. First is on community media. Second, about climate reporting and rights. Here I talk slightly about climate rights, what is climate justice, how climate right justice reflect in community reporting. And third part is mostly on journalistic roles. Here I would like to point out that when I started my thesis, it was called Community Reporting for Climate Justice. But however, as I went to field, as I went for my field work, and as my thesis progressed, I found a right-based approach to be more appropriate for this thesis. And why, I will elaborate. Research approach. So of course, research approach is primarily ethnography, which is observing people, institution in natural environment, and PAR, which is participatory action research. Now, one important consideration in PAR, which is participatory action research, that it is not much practiced in PhD level. Why? Because of course it is time constrained, it is resource intensive, and it is it is a very ambitious project, which I totally understood in the beginning. However, as I did some digging into action research, I found this book, particularly Participatory Research by Shkubots 2020, helpful to know that participatory research can have several levels. So first, if we look at collaboration, it can range from simply sharing information and advice to peer review. And if we look at outcomes, it can be simply as capacity building and training to institutional level changes. Some degree of even light touch of power and effort is good than nothing at all. So when I started this PhD, my idea was to have a very basic level of PAR intervention, static collaboration ranging from sharing information to advice to outcomes, simply from recommendations to opening the conversation at a local level. I kept it fluid. My research questions, of course, these were arrived only after a few stages of pilot study, which I will discuss later, but I thought for the sake of clarity, I would just list them now. So first, of course, my first research question is, what does right-based climate reporting mean for community media? Because I, as an outsider, am going with certain assumption that it means something, they're fighting for justice. What actually it means for community media? My second research question, how do community media conceive their roles in right-based climate reporting? Third, of course, very simple, how do they enact? What factors influence their enactment? And how community media outlets negotiate this gap? It would be community media reporters. And fourth, what can be done to bridge the gap between journalists' role conception and enactment for enhancing a right-based approach to climate reporting? So, as following the spirit of power, like it's been 2 years now. So, the first stage in 2024, I conducted a small pilot study. I chose two organization which was mostly driven by the sampling was driven by by two consideration. First, community media outlets which are affected by climate related issues, and second, a bit of purposive sampling, because I also needed consent from these outlets to be there and work. So at the end, I chose two community media outlets. One was called Karal Osai, which is a community radio station based in the southernmost tip of India in Rameshwaram. And second was Video Volunteer, a mobile journalism digital native website run by communities in tea gardens. Of course, Video Volunteers run all across the country, but I found tea garden interesting due to several reasons. So I visited there for almost about 2 weeks, and some of my initial understanding was, first, climate reporting is everyday reporting in community issues, because communities live very close to nature in the places where I visit. For example, if there is a trawler or someone is being arrested by another country, Sri Lankan Navy, for intruding their water, it is related to climatic issue, because fish production in the Indian side is going down. Secondly, women are more adversely than men. Third, for climate reporting or any sort of reporting, it is based on lived experiences, folklore, culture, entertainment. These aspects form a very important part of community reporting. When it comes to hurdles in reporting, I found political interference and lack of awareness about issues of climate change itself missing in communities. Lastly, communities media do not challenge, as I thought with the idea that they would be challenging power structures. It's always a very collaborative approach, because they have to live and thrive in the same power structures where they will get remedies. And of course, community media reporters didn't identify themselves as journalists. They mostly identify themselves as social workers. An important outcome of my pilot study was to also identify the right organization. What I found that in Karalose, which is the radio station which I selected, language was a very big barrier for me. I felt that I was not quite accepted because I didn't know the language there, Tamil. So I decided to change the radio which I was working with, and then I moved to Radio Mandakini, a community made radio station in Uttarakhand. Finally, the three organizations I worked with was Video Volunteers, which I said offer training on mobile journalism to marginalized communities. Stories are shared in their websites and YouTube channels. The site I chose for this were the tea gardens in West Bengal. Radio Mandakini, a small community media radio station located in Uttarakhand, a state which has been rocked by so many natural calamities over the past years. And Khabar Lahariya, an all-women media outlet that offers neo-literate women print and digital platforms in central India. Now, this sampling was, of course, decided based on a few consideration, and one of the consideration was the different impact of climatic events that intersected with varied social, economic, and political context. For example, in the tea gardens, it was context of economic repression and colonial power structure. In Khabar Leheria, it was more about corruption, patriarchy, and of course, harsh weather conditions in which the media outlets' main operations were located, and Radio Mandakini, of course, where you have seen a lot of climatic events in the last few years. Another main consideration was to look into the diversity of platforms. If we look into community media landscape today, it's basically radio, and the second is digital. So I found having a radio in my sample really important. And the second two, or the next two organization, Video Volunteers and Khabar Leheria, gave different perspectives, because Khabar Leheria moved from print to digital. As we know, print is kind of even hit hard in every sector, including community media. So they have moved from print to digital. Video Volunteers is only digital native, working with mobile journalism. So all these contexts, and of course, my ability to access their workspaces for a prolonged period of time for my field work was a very active consideration for this selection. And especially Khabar Leheria was very important, I thought, because it is one of the most successful community media outlets in India, and it gave the much needed gendered perspective. Okay. Just one thing, one of the ideas, as I said, for my pilot study was to understand what can be done in form of power intervention. So before going to my main field study, I pitched this idea to different outlets. One of the propositions which I said, one of the problems which I identified was lack of awareness and unequal power structures in community media on issues related to climate reporting. So in my literature review, I found one interesting study by Harvey et al. 2012, where the researchers had tried to create a physical space where all the community stakeholders could come and foster a dialogue about issues related to climate, their rights, and how communities can better withstand the impacts of climate. So inspired by a similar initiative, I thought if I could open up a space where different stakeholders within the community media landscape could come and discuss ideas related to climate, it will serve as a means to increase awareness about climate related issues in these areas, and second, it will open up more dialogue with diverse stakeholders who are, some of them might be more powerful, like politicians, or maybe someone from corporate entities, or some, like in tea gardens, it could be tea garden managers. So it could be a collaborative space for engagement of different stakeholders. One important question I was faced when I spoke to these communities, that why would we do this kind of an event when we already have small level events in communities now and then. So another interesting understanding from my literature was that cultural forms, songs, dance, folklores, and entertainment is one of the binding factors for communities. So I pitched them this idea as having a space where communities can showcase their own culture, song, dance, and can connect with their own culture, and at the same time discuss issues related to climate and rights. With all these ideas, I started my field work in 2025 between June and October, and my ethnographic work lasted for about 7 weeks in 3 sites, which I mentioned. And right now also it's an ongoing engagement as part of PAR in digital platforms. Methods were basically semi-structured interviews with journalistic and non-journalistic actors, reconstructed interviews, participant observation, focus group discussions, etc. Overall, how I positioned PAR and ethnography, I found it more pragmatic to have ethnography as my core method, where I use field notes, participant observation, all the methods I mentioned. First, to get, of course, my data, but all these observations help me in familiarization, my acceptability, open spaces for sustained working relationships with communities, help develop and research my research questions and methods. And at the periphery, I kept PAR, where based on the relationship which I developed during that ethnographic study, I tried to have a collaborative dialogue about how to solve these problems with the community media outlets. It also offered me a more participatory approach in my whole research. So overall, these were my first two stages. So first, of course, the field study stage started with pilot study, ethnographic data collection. And during this ethnographic data collection, I also had some, which I can call an action stage one, where I introduced the concept of climate justice, rights, and about the event, which I eventually could materialize in one of the sites. So who held that event in tea gardens in Bengal, which I would elaborate. And of course, the second stage was more of an institutional change and practicing climate justice and recommendations. So this was which was kind of, the study is evolving, and I'm still working on, if I should use climate justice at all as a conceptual framework here. So I'll just briefly what really happened during my field trip. So first, in the radio station, in Mandakini Ki Awaz, it was absolutely a wrong timing for a community event. Although it was around June and July when there is heavy rainfall, it gave me good perspectives on how community media engaged in events of extreme climatic weather. But it was a wrong timing. People didn't have time to come to an sort of an event which I planned. However, it gave me somewhat when I spoke about my research, and that my research is focused on climate rights and community climate justice. I found that the reporters were very much intrigued, and that's when I did a small presentation at the end of my ethnographic study. It was basically a knowledge transfer, which just emerged there. I just made a small presentation based on the very rudimentary concepts, or translated into Hindi, into what is climate justice. I gave them very basic understandings of concepts like procedural, distributive, recognitional climate justice in these slides. It was quite interesting that they found these concepts very new, as well as very much appropriate for them, because they haven't thought they're reporting in terms of a right-based reporting, what it could mean. And at the end, into 2026, they actually adopted, I didn't play any part in it, Jalwayu Nyay, or climate justice, as their theme. Of course, over the years, I was engaged with them. So we had some of the speakers, experts who would talk about what climate rights mean for community radios, how can community exert their rights, different concepts. So we had about 5 to 6 speakers, and of course I was kind of telling them, okay, fine, you can have this speaker and responsible for this. We also had some audience interface questions, where the radio put up questions like, what does development mean for you in Uttarakhand? Does it really infringe with community rights, with kind of development we are having? So it kind of opened this conversation about a concept that was very much implicit to become more explicit. About field trip to Khabar Lahariya, I did my field trip. I will have a slide on my findings later, but they were not interested in further PAR engagement. Also, I had difficulties in getting access, so I could only access their workspaces for a week. But it led to really interesting and insightful data shadowing the reporters for a week. Also, it was very interesting. With your volunteers in tea gardens, of course, I have been planning for 1 year. They were more receptive to this idea of having a climate event. We had actually a climate event attended by 10 people. after I came back with in the second part, which I mentioned in the earlier research, they actually formed a research group with the reporters. They identified areas in which they work, like need for more climate reporting training, further events on climate awareness, micro stories on climate and daily lives. As you can see some of these pictures, so we had these events. Of course, it was more about climate change and community media rather than climate justice or any other form of jargons which we use in community setups. It was a very simple event where experts from the community, from the Adivasi community, local experts, local teachers, they came, and then there was some sort of cultural event and they spoke about issues related to climate. After this event, they are now planning to have similar event in smaller format in other parts of tea gardens as well. Overall, I'm still coding and analyzing all my data, which I have collected. So it's very like initial stages of my data analysis. But what I understood so far is that climate justice as a Western concept is not entirely applicable in local context, because when we talk about climate justice, we talk about loss and damage, who is responsible, who is paying the price. So it doesn't work in local context. My idea was that what we are having in somewhat COP or whatever conversations we are having at these intergovernmental levels, how does it percolate at the local level? No, because climate change there is seen as an act of God, and the responsibility for whatever they are going through is not ascribed to a particular agent or agency. However, climate rights is more of an implicit practice. It is about preserving their own culture, own identity. It is about micro and individual rights, about maybe if one person is not getting entitlement, or if his light electricity connection has snapped because of a storm, or if the road needs to be kind of repaired, or there's water problems. So these small rights matter for community media. It's about micro and individual rights. Accountability is a big part of community media reporting, because accountability, if the community media is showing something, reporting something, talking to media, they always go back to government and ask question, what is this happening, what are you doing about it? Accountability is important issue. However, there are issues related to, of course, climate rights also means questioning development paradigms, rights over natural resources, man-made problems. For example, the large number of trees which have been cut in Banda, where I visited for Kabarla area for constructing roads. So that is these are kind of paradigms which are being questioned. Similarly, in tea gardens, when they are cutting trees, because how is it impacting the workers' working condition in the region? Of course, climate rights is right to livelihood. It is about sustaining impact of changing weather patterns, and there is no one one agency responsible for it, but they want some sustainability, some sort of what is the need, the rights which they are demanding. It's not something that they have been demanding, but the rights relate to sustaining those impacts. Government is seen as one of the sole custodian of justice delivery, because in every aspect it's the government which has to deliver whatever happening. Is government is seen as a key stakeholder in justice delivery. Role conception, which was one of my research questions, of course, it was rooted in social upliftment, lived experience. Community reporters identify themselves more as part of communities. They don't want to be recognized themselves as journalists, because they are mainstream journalists who have little acceptability in communities. However, this is a very fluid role, because when they go to or confront a government official, where somewhat, when they go as a journalist, they ask questions, then of course they take pride in introducing themselves as reporters, because that's what gives them certain agency. So it's a fluid role dependent on context. It's also a very much gendered experience, how it gives identity to women reporters more than men. Of course, there are barriers to power structure like political pressure, community power, asserting rights. role enactment, of course, it is more mediated by politicians who don't want to give credit to community media reporters. And of course, one very interesting issue was commute as a gendered experience, commuting from the place, because these reporters are going really covering long distances in public transport to cover these issues. So commute as a gendered experience, women who face extra kind of barriers or extra efforts, or they face extra threats when they commute for these reporting, which of course mainstream media, if reporters, if they go in an air conditioned car with 2-3 people accompanying them. So these were some of the findings, and as I said, this is an ongoing process. I did identify some learnings from PAR, what could be done better, what should not be done. We don't have time for it. Of course, there are many limitations which I'm sure would come as I progress. But of course, there is lack of parity in research methods. For example, in one group, focus group discussion worked. In another group, there was no space for focus group consideration. My access was kind of limited depending on the availability of the space, and my accessibility, my own acceptability there, and of course, park constraint. So yeah, these were it. And of course, if we look at the contributions, of course, it's more about theoretical contribution is more about journalistic roles in community media through ethnography, studying it because it has been studied mostly in this realm of mainstream media. Methodological contribution, I think, is one of the strongest, where I am integrating ethnographic with PAR. And of course, empirical contribution, which is also an ongoing process, offers tangible outcomes to communities. So yeah, that's it. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Namrata, for such an interesting presentation. Apparently, as I was discussing with Dr. Stellina, the topic might not be directly related to my expertise, but actually, these topics and many other ultimately reach the superior courts, the constitutional courts, and there are many famous rulings on this from the Indian Supreme Court and the European constitutional courts. But I will not talk about that. Today it is your session. So without much ado, I will go to Dr. Karina Shyrokykh for their comments. Over to you, Dr. Karina.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Namrata, it was really interesting to hear about the impressive empirical work that you have conducted. It really shows that you have put much thought and effort into data collection, trying to engage with local communities. And it is something that is very timely, I would say, in climate governance literature, as most of the literature until recently typically would focus on state-level actors and try to come up with frameworks, but also policies demanding states, requesting states to come up with legislation and enforce legislation. Local activities often would be overlooked, but we know, of course, that most of the emission takes place at the local level, but also climate change adaptation policies have to be implemented at the local level. So climate change is very localized, but we do not see that much research that goes into the studies of different localities and their characteristics when explaining different outcomes. So for that, much praise for your interesting research. I think that you're after something interesting here. I will provide my comments from the point of view of an IR scholar, international relations scholar, and somebody with a very positivist perspective in my core, so to say. So I'm not much aware with ethnographic methodology or with PAR itself. So please take my feedback with much, with keeping this in mind, right? That I have my epistemological length, but also some length due to the field that I'm embedded in. One of the questions that I had throughout your presentation was regarding your theoretical contribution. I had this question from the first until the last slide of your presentation. Every thesis is obviously expected to contribute to the empirical literature, was an interesting empirical study, but also it is expected to make a theoretical contribution. It can be trying a theory, testing a theory that used to be applied in different cases and a new case. So theoretical contribution should be there. My question, therefore, is what is your theoretical contribution beyond explaining and describing journalistic roles? This is really important. Also, it felt like when I was fishing for the theoretical puzzle and theoretical contribution, it felt like the journalistic roles, that is the main prism, analytical prism that you have in your thesis, you approach this with very much descriptive ambition, right? So maybe I missed it somehow, but I didn't feel that you are interested in determining differences in journalistic roles. For instance, which factors lead to, let's say, particular choice and selection of a journalistic role, but by a local media or individual journalists, right? So this is something that you would need to beef up, perhaps. So what is the variance that you try to explain? What do you try to explain theoretically? Are the different positions that journalists take at the local level? Do you try to explain these differences through your theoretical perspective? Yeah, so the question why has to be a major part of a thesis, any thesis, I would say. And once you have this question why, and once you have the variance either in the independent variables or in the dependent variables, it will help you clarify what is impacting what and what you're after beyond simply describing the reality, which you do very well empirically, but there has to be this analytical layer that is not yet there. Then for PAR, once again, I have never applied this method myself. I don't know much about that, but from the top of my head, I was feeling if you are not polluting the results by interfering, right? So if you're interested in, let's say, capturing the level of awareness among journalists about climatic things, climate change effects and causes of climate change, if by providing information to them and giving presentations and lectures, you're not polluting, you're not giving them answers that later on they will be giving to you, right? So how much knowledge that you extract is due to your activities with local communities. I have my last question that I wanted to come to, which is a big elephant in a way. You referred to climate using very different phenomena, disastrous events, pollution, whatnot. How do you define climate? Do you refer to climate change here as a result of human activities, as a result of industrial pollution and, well, other man activities? Or do you see climate change here as climate change adaptation activities, climate action? So what is climate for you? Which elements of climate change do you single out? Climate health, climate security, climate water security. So this also has to be delimited somehow. What do you mean when you say climate change? Yeah, so that your respondents also have clear answers when responding to you. But overall, impressive work, well done, very impressive empirics, and I'm sure that you'll be able to publish in leading journals with this impressive empirics. Well done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karina, for your comments. I would like to request you, Namrata, to take notes, and once all discussants finish their comments, then you can. I will give you the floor to respond to them briefly. Without much ado, we have the IR perspective, Namrata. Now let's listen to the legal perspective. For that, let's go to Dr. Stellina, please. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Namrata. For me, I think it was a very, very learning experience. Hearing the climate narrative and discussion in India from a very, very different perspective. So in the legal literature, when we talk about the media and other aspects, we mention it as a kind of footnote. Okay, the media has a major role to play, but we believe that, okay, law has a much larger role to play. But your presentation has very beautifully shown that how especially the empirical research, the media reporting, And even in terms of localized, we normally talk about the research which is taking place at the local level. So I think today I understood that climate reporting definitely has a much broader scope and much greater coverage than perhaps an individual or the empirical research part. So I really enjoyed your presentation. But I start with a caveat. I have my limitation, as Norman said. I come from the law, so my perspective may not be so much relevant. So my comments, some of them are observations and also maybe a very curious questions. So I was trying to understand from your overall presentation. See, there are two dimensions I could actually find. Like, correct me if I am wrong. One, when you talk about climate right-based reporting, in some part, I felt your presentation is definitely focusing on the journey or the concept. You talked about the concept of the journalism and how you try to implement that or enact it. So I felt it's more about that journalistic journey that you're actually focusing on, how the climate reporting at the grassroots level can be reshaped or remodeled. But on the other part, I also felt Tricky, your presentation is focusing on the community journey, where the community, the media, where the local women and other participation. So is it that you wanted to focus on both, or it is essentially the whatever the narrative and discourse, it is through that journalistic prism and lens where the community lived experience is just through the journalistic view? Somewhere it was not very clear, because it was appearing that once you talk about a kind of a lived experiences or their capacity building or the community active participation, on the other hand you're talking about that journalism. I think maybe you can make that a little bit of that distinction. The second, when it comes to maybe it is a good to engage. I remember that you talked about it's more of a top-down model that has its own flow. But whenever we talk about any climate discourse, it's also good to engage at the international level, especially with the legal instrument, UNFCCC and all. Why I would want you to engage with UNFCCC, if you see, we understand that it's a very state-centric one, but the people or the stakeholders now who are party to the negotiations are much broader, right? So even if you look at, they have a constituency which is for the youth, young ho. I think it's anybody above 13 or 14 years can be register. So I'm sure the UNFCCC does have a platform for the media as well. So I believe that there is medias which can be accredited, not just the larger media houses, but it can even maybe include community media as well. So that way, actually, they get a direct entry to the global level to even pass over their voices to the larger community, and also to learn from the experiences from the similar kind of an experiments which is taking place all around. And I also believe the UNFCCC does have a lot of fellowship for different students. I'm sure there should be some of the training mechanism for even the journalist, because even in the context of education, UNFCCC has a capacity building program which is operating in different countries so that education and curricula can be improved with climate change. So the point I'm trying to say is that even at the UNFCCC level, the stakeholders, the base has really broadened, and that definitely includes media as well. So maybe some part you could even look at that, whether there could be any window or a hook for that particular aspect. So just you said of climate justice being a Western concept, I do have certain objection towards it. Even though it may have originated from the Europe, the United States, from the environmental law justice, the Indian environmental governance, if you look at the movement, it is always the mass-based. You look at the authors like Ram Guha, who's talked about it is not just the racial based, it is caste, gender. So it's essentially a very, very community based movement. So the difference you're talking about, the climate rights and climate justice, is not really different. So it is really integrated. So you can't just talk about climate rights without borrowing the climate justice. So I think that difference could be very, very problematic. That and even in the larger context, the entire global south, the India at the global negotiation has again and again asking for climate justice part. So even when you talk about electricity, that electricity access is normally impacting underprivileged, even in the local community. So climate justice definitely comes into that arena, even without mentioning it. So this is something I think normatively you can take into account. But it was a very wonderful presentation and all the very best.
Thank you, Dr. Stellina, for very insightful comments. Now we have legal and contextual feedback. Let's go to Shivani for purely environmental sciences feedback. Over to you, Shivani, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Namrata, for that excellent presentation. I come from an ethnographic background, so I'm more familiar, I would say, with the methods that you've used and the approach that you've used. I really appreciate the sort of power dynamics you brought within the group. So, for example, the communities are driven by external groups, the journalists are driven by external groups. They don't even identify themselves as journalists. The socio-political conditions, they sort of are at the forefront of everything. So, you mentioned caste, power. You also mentioned the power differences between the mainstream media and the community media. I think they were really important, especially the agency of the reporters. And I think that the journey that you mentioned, how your project progressed, the difference between the insider, the outsider, I think they are really important to highlight, because that's the reality of an ethnographic study. You can't really differentiate between the insider and the outsider. So the changing process within your thesis, how you sort of identified organizations, but then you had to change organization, the issues that you faced with the access, the engagement, and how you had to make your project a little flexible. I think these are all the problems that are at the core of an ethnographic study. And I actually appreciate that you highlighted this, because a lot of times we package our studies in a very sort of perfect manner, but they all face these issues. So I actually congratulate you for highlighting these, because these are the realities, what's happening at the background of the polished final results. I also I think you are targeting a very essential gap in the literature, and that is how the communities perceive climate justice. And I think you're unpacking it beautifully. Of course, you said that you're just at the beginning of coding and finalizing your results. So I think you're heading in the correct direction. So, for example, I really like that you're questioning the entire theory of climate justice, if it's applicable in India. And the reason for that is, of course, it's applicable. But the question, I think, over here, what I've identified is if it's not applicable in the sense that if it's not relevant or not. I think the question you're trying to deal with is what language the community is speaking, how they are understanding the climate justice issues. So I think you're taking it from a very community-based perspective, and I think that's a huge gap within the climate justice sort of framework. And I think maybe you can talk a little bit about it, if you can connect the climate justice to the environmental justice issues. What are some of the other theories that you've sort of explored? So, for example, have you explored environmentalism of the dispossessed? If you've explored within the environmental justice framework, the branch of socio-ecological justice. I'll be really interested in hearing those things. I also like how you've explored the power aspect, because it is very difficult to implement and do justice to it. So I appreciate how you've sort of also picked it apart, identified what are the elements you are able to do, what are the elements of it that you found difficult. So, for example, in PAR, you really have to co-design your project, but as you said, in a PhD, it's really difficult because your research questions are sort of already set by the time you reach the communities. So I would like to hear more about that, about sort of how with the pilot study you sort of tried to co-design your project as you're using PAR. And I also would like to hear more within this co-design. You said you had groups come together, so different actors come together. You made a space for that. So what I would like to hear more about is the power dynamics between these different actors. So if the tea plantation manager is in the same space as the workers, are the workers really able to speak their mind? What are they able to say? So I'm pretty sure you're familiar with those aspects, so I would like to hear more about that. I also like Dr. Stellina said that in ethnography, I think media is just taken as a footnote. So I really like this perspective about mixing the media perspective with ethnography. So yeah, I also want to hear more about the community journey, because like you said, I really appreciate the personal journey sort of that you took us through. But was that a factor within the semi-structured interviews that you did, just to sort of nitpick the community journey further? Thank you, and all the best.
Great. Thanks, Shivani, for providing the ethnographic perspective. Now, last but not the least, sorry for making you wait, but I think, I put you in the end on purpose because I thought it's the media studies, and the media studies perspective should come at the end so that we can help the presenter to neutralize all those, different perspectives. And if there is any confusion, she would be able to focus on that. So Lasha, over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for a really interesting presentation, Namrata, and I will try to have this media perspective, or to bring the media perspective. You are really against some big monsters, like when it comes to topic, like whether it would be community media versus mainstream media, or whether it would be climate justice. Like there's so many aspects, and there's been already so many good points raised, but I have I will try to focus on three specific topics, and please don't take this as criticism, more of a curiosity on my side, because I don't have a text as such, so I'm basing my questions on the presentation that I just listened. So first is about more of an empirical side. Like I think what I missed during the presentation was a bit like discussion, like the why community media specifically, like when it comes to like you mentioned this, but like I think I would like to hear more about the impact of community media on society, especially in the Indian context, because community media is like the specificity of community media is that it's community, it's very local, it's very diverse. So, for example, just to give you like very crude example, like in Sweden, I know for where I studied, where I did my master's, community media is not impactful at all. While in India, that might be completely different. So, like I would like to hear more about the impact of the community media, and do they actually have power to change things in the society when it comes to climate justice? So that's more over like on your sampling part and the more empirical part. Second, like I think there's a little bit of expectation set that your project is very much focused on roles, journalistic roles. And like the moment I saw your presentation, the concept that popped in my mind was journalistic role conception, role performances, which I don't know if you've read the book by Claudia Melado. I think it's super interesting book and very relevant for your thesis. And once again, as this is just a presentation, I could not see your footnotes or your sources, so I can just like, I wanted to tip this book as a relevant, because like you talk about enactment and conception, while Claudia Melado already talks about conceptions and performances. And in my head, performance makes a little bit more sense than enactment, because enactment seems somewhat forced, that someone is forcing journalists to enact something, while performance, to a certain degree, like I can talk as a ex-journalist, we all perform as journalists, like we pretend that we know more about things than we actually know quite often. So I think the perform like this might spare you from theoretical brain picking, or I don't know, like it might just give you good framework to work. And the third one is more about your methodology, like, and especially about your limitations. Like in limitations, you mentioned that the issues with access, but actually my impression was that you don't have issues with access, and I know that it's in a way like it's a convention that like every researcher talks about issues with access, but like my impression was that you had perfectly fine access. And actually what I would like to hear more is how you were separating your identity as a researcher and as activist to a certain degree. Like whether did you have this dilemma as a researcher to keep this line? And I think that would also quite naturally bond to the question with the PAR and action research in general, because at least in journalism studies or media studies, action research very often is kind of frowned upon. So I think I would like to hear more about the limitations of this navigating this identity as a researcher slash journalist. And in the end, like just to kind of sum up, I think like based on your findings, at least what I saw, you talk a little bit less about role performances or about journalistic roles than I would like to hear. Like I could not really identify exactly the journalistic roles that you were talking about, because there are some universal journalistic roles like watchdog, or I don't know, like there are so many theories about journalistic roles that you could invoke in a way. And I have the feeling you quite naturally have quite substantial part of your findings about more societal impact, and I think that should be also impacted or reflected to a certain degree in your title somewhere, or maybe in your like introduction more, that this is not only about journalistic roles but also the impact of media to climate justice or to society in general. So that's all. I hope it wasn't too scattered.
Great, thank you, Rasha, for, as expected, very rich, very informative and relevant feedback. Now, Namrata, law, IR,
Yes.
ethnography, and the media studies perspective. All said, all done. The ball is in your court now. But don't feel pressured. PhD is a journey. It continues, and probably even if you finish, there will always be a feedback. So you don't need to answer all of those questions. You can always follow up on these comments by reaching out to them directly. So yeah, please briefly, over to you.
First of all, thank you so much for all the feedback. It was kind of a mini Viva kind of an experience. So I'm very happy that you asked me tough questions, because it always makes me rethink. And it's a process. I'm still some months away from submitting my thesis, and I'm also confused about many parts. I'm still thinking all the time, is it the right approach I'm taking? So, of course. So, first about Theoretical contribution, of course, yes, that's a very kind of I would admit that I would need to, I have done many kind of I have done a literature review, but if you ask me about theoretical contribution, so I am yet to think, because right now I'm in the process of coding, and then I'm looking into themes, and then I'm kind of connecting the themes to see if there is a theoretical contribution which is adding to some already theories which is available, or if I am making some new theoretical contribution. But as of now, I am focusing mostly on journalistic roles, and the idea that journalistic role conception and role enactment cannot be connected in a mainstream media, but I'm looking into how it connects in mainstream community media. So that's an area which I need to really work upon, and it's still a work in progress. But thank you so much for pointing it out, right? And so I'll be focusing more on thinking of the more the contributions which I could make. Second was the question. A knowledge extraction. Okay, where was it? Because if my own views vitiated the findings, so I always ensured that my I provided this kind of presentation or whatever I had as part of PAR at the end of my data collection. So first I had really almost all my data collection for a week or 2 week whenever I had access. And it was only at the end, the day before I left, I had this kind of conversation or presentation which I had on climate related, on climate justice as an issue. Right. Second, there was this question from Stellina about you, about on journal. If I'm talking through journalist lens or as a community lens, whose lens I am talking to here, I am looking at a community reporter as a representative, as part of a community, representative of a voice of the community, as a unit of community, because community reporters are living in that environment, they are facing the same situation and they are reporting. So the only difference is variable factor is they're going out and reporting. So they essentially seen as voice of community mediated through, of course, a platform or media where they are working. Of course, thank you so much for this UNFCC suggestions. I would definitely look into this, because I think that my literature on climate reporting needs to be further, on climate justice and environmental justice, whichever paradigm I'm choosing needs much more rigor there. Of course, you talked about this climate justice as a Western concept. I absolutely, I must admit that this is something I'm questioning myself right now. That if at all I need to have climate justice, or is more about right, because when we talk about climate justice, and we always think that it is related to somewhat a climate change, climatic event that has changed leading to some sort of justice. But I felt that when I'm going reporting, I really don't know that if this event is on account of a long-term climate change, or is it a product of their natural environment, or is it a man-made thing. So when there are these so many aspects, so I thought let it right now be climate right-based reporting. But as you pointed out, that it definitely is aligned very well with climate justice, so I would definitely now go back and look more confidently in the framework for climate justice. So thank you so much for this feedback, kind of clears my doubt as well. uh, of course, Shivani, thank you so much for your views. It was really helpful. One thing, you asked me about PAR and powered. The question about you was like how PAR as a journey, and how I kind of led to this collaborative approach after my pilot to co-design the project. So I think that right from first of all, as I said, what it was at the end, it was only like two organizations I was working with. So as we see in PAR, which is a very fluid concept. So at the start, when I pitched some idea, it was very difficult for me to make them understand. And once they could understand and have some sort of we had some sort of working relation, I did find that I was asking them that if you would want to have some sort of intervention or some sort of suggestion, if we could do something. So it was, I would say that it was kind of a researcher led initiative, which is also kind of a a drawback that I was kind of asking them if you would want to have this initiative. But at the same time, the good thing that was that when I had actually, it's the communities, when you go into a setup like communities, they have like hundreds of things about their livelihood issues, everything to worry about rather than thinking about an event. But when we actually had the event, we had it, the whole event was actually designed by communities. They had their own network of different stakeholders, who non-journalistic actors, and who came across and designed it. So it was a very much a collaborative approach, and then they said that they would want to do it again, but it's just that the constraint that communities face in their day-to-day life, it was somewhat, it becomes a more researcher led initiative.
Namrata, one more minute.
Yes. Okay. About the empirical side, impact of community media in India. So of course that is a part on literature which I should definitely look into. Thank you so much, Lasha, for pointing out. But I think still community media has a very kind of a localized impact. It is something that we don't see. It is not a public domain or recorded kind of documented impact which we find. It's something that is very much there in local level. For example, they create an ecosystem where I went to central India and Kabul area, where I see that there is women-led reporters, so women are going out and reporting. And now there are many small, really small outlets in different parts, and they have women reporters. I got to know there were not so many women reporters just in the ecosystem, local ecosystem, that is kind of sometimes it's very difficult to kind of measure that impact, that what is it actually kind of impact it is having in the society. But India being so vast and so in different parts, if there is one community media outlet, it is having a small kind of a micro level impact. And of course, yes, journalistic role performance. This is something, once again, I would say that I'm exploring this area about Claudia Melado. My supervisor, Dr. Leah Hellmuller, is also involved in many books and theories on journalistic role. So I'm definitely doing that, and something which is still a work in progress. And as I go with my coding process, I do hope that I would have a better theoretical perspective. And last, about my action research, about separating my activity as an identity, as an activist, or if I'm keep navigating it as a journalist. So of course, as I said, my most of my core findings are based on my ethnographic study, which is kind of forms the major part of my study.
Thank you very much, Namrata, for such an insightful and stimulating presentation. The work and the presentation makes a valuable contribution to the broader discussions on the relationship between community media and climate reporting, and it has given us much to reflect on. My heartfelt thanks also go to our excellent discussants, Dr. Karina, Dr. Stellina, Dr. Shivani, and Dr. Rasha, for their thoughtful and engaging feedback, and to everyone who joined us today for your participation and support. The Global South Network warmly welcomes PhD students from all disciplines and from every corner of the world to share their research and receive interdisciplinary feedback. If you are interested in presenting your work or taking part in a future session as a discussant or a chair, please contact me at the email address leakgsn@gmail.com. Same time next week, let's meet our next guest speaker, Shamila Yusuf Ali from School of Arts and Media, Birmingham City University, is going to present her PhD project, Art, Memory and Digital Resistance, Sri Lankan Muslim Women on Facebook. Until then, look after yourself. See you next week, same day and time. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you once again for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.